Kia ora koutou. Welcome to this evening's public submissions on the housing strategy, affordable housing entity. Tonight we've got, at this stage we've got 7 speakers lined up to speak. We've got the first 2 that are here and we're ready to go with those. Before we get into the speaking from those in the public that are speaking today, and we've got some others that are here to observe, so welcome everyone. Thanks for coming out at this time of the evening to do this particular part, and thank you to the councillors who are here. I do have apologies from Councillor Pravanov and our Mayor, who both are heading on leave over the next few days, so they're here. I know our Mayor is online and observing and listening into this, but was unable to make it in person tonight. So you're happy to observe, Mr. Larissy? Thank you. All right, so just as an introduction, I'm going to hand over to our staff just to give us a bit of a background on this process that we've followed so far that has come to this point of the public submissions and speaking to their submissions tonight. So I'll hand it over to Laura.
Thank you. Yeah, as mentioned, I thought I'd give a bit of an overview. There's been a bit of a period of wait time between the consultation going live and the place that we're at now. So on the 28th of February, we had an overview of the Affordable Housing Entity project. We provided a summary of the housing needs assessment, which was completed in 2022, along with the housing strategy. Julie Scott from Queenstown Lakes Community Housing Trust also dialed into that session, and she provided a summary of their journey and also their learnings over the past 14 years of their operation. An overview of the proposed objectives for the entity and the options for an entity were discussed. And it was requested that a separate session in March was held so that we can hear from those who wish to speak to their submission as part of the consultation process, which has brought us here today. And so just recapping over the previous council recommendation back in May 2022. So that was confirming the preferred option for an affordable housing entity was the establishment of the Independent Community Land Trust. That the option is to be structured so that it can partner with iwi and other organisations to deliver social and affordable housing solutions and support existing providers to improve housing outcomes in Kapiti. A draft statement of proposal was approved, which also came alongside the approval of consultation on the preferred option to occur for a 4-week period, which commenced in early June 2022. And so through the consultation process, the community were able to submit responses online and in hard copy with boxes in council libraries and service centres across the district. To support the process of consultation, it was publicised in newspapers, through radio advertising, media advisory, an email to all the Housing Needs Assessment Survey respondents, Engagement HQ subscribers, through Facebook, Instagram and Neighbourly posts, a digital ad campaign, and also a story in everything Kapiti. And so a full pack of the submissions will be provided as an attachment to a report on the 27th of April, but today you should have each of the speakers' submissions to refer to. In total, 279 responses were received during the consultation process. 82.1%, which was 224 respondents, were supportive of the preferred option. 6 respondents skipped this question or did not provide an answer, and 17.9% or 49 respondents were not supportive of the preferred option. And as mentioned, 7 respondents will speak to their submission this evening. And that's all from me, so I will hand over to those speaking. Do we have Chris online first, I think? Not there at the moment.
Okay. So my understanding, our first speaker was Chris, who's coming in online. So he hasn't arrived yet. So we'll move to you, John. You are going to be first after all, as you first expected. And we're ahead of schedule, which I think is probably a record for me chairing a meeting, that we're actually ahead of schedule after 5 minutes, of course. So John, welcome.
Okay.
I'll let you get settled down. Welcome, John. Thank you for coming in, and we look forward to hearing from you now in terms of your presentation for us.
Okay, I've called this a trust rather than a housing entity. But anyway, I conditionally support a community land trust. However, there is a lack of clarity in the proposal around what the purpose of the trust is, what it's expected to deliver, what the relationship to council will be, who's going to determine its objective, and what's the setup process, and what funding is involved. You really need to have clear objectives, defined outcomes, specific actions, and specific timescales for those actions, and the necessary funding to succeed and deliver, driven by sustainability and resilience. Oops, something's happening. Oops, okay. Basic questions for the council are, why are you doing this? You need to define the problem in order to solve it. What's it going to deal with? Who's involved? Where will it operate? When will it deliver? And how much is it all going to cost? I suggest you need a clear, oops, I think I missed one. I suggest you need a clear purpose, clear outcomes, specific actions and timelines. And I've listed some possible outcomes from reducing homelessness right through to acting as a developer and anything in between. The main point here is you need specific outcomes in a specific timetable, otherwise it's quite meaningless. In terms of governance, the council needs to second a councillor and staff and support to set up the steering group, appoint as chief executive, and ultimately a paid part-time board. Oops, what's happened there? The trust needs to have a clear vision of what it wants to do. It needs to establish a clear operating framework, specific actions, specific targets, specific timelines, and an evaluation process to confirm it's actually achieving something. None of this is going to happen, None of this is going to happen unless it's resourced properly. You need to allocate staff, funding, and resources. I suggest the following timelines. Year 1 for the initial setup, following developing a program and sourcing funding to carry out the first projects. Thereafter, on a 3-year cycle, the first 3 years on establishment, raising funding, and doing the first easy win projects. The second 3 years bedding in those projects, and the third 3 years developing further. I've got a few extra comments which I haven't put in the PowerPoint. I'd just like to note, since 2008, there have been at least 6 reports to Council on Housing. And 15 years later, here we are, and a year after formulating a housing strategy, not a lot has happened. So you've got to decide to move forward in a coordinated, thought-out, collective way to be effective, to achieve results in housing supply and improving housing conditions. Or you could just abandon the whole idea. Affordable housing is vital for the district's future and sustainability. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, John. Do we have any questions for John? Councillor Halliday.
Oh, dear, thank you. Actually, it's more clarity from a staff perspective or officer's perspective, if that's possible. Thank you very much, John. There's some very, very valid points there, some very, very good points there. With regards to the consultation that went out, it seems like it might have been a little bit light on some of those details, but correct me if I'm wrong, that's sort of the next step for us after we just get, should we say, permission from the community, or we're hearing back what the community's got to say. We're going to shake this down into how we go about it. Would that be a fair comment?
Yes, that's fair.
Okay, so John, from that perspective, I don't really have any questions for you because I think you've supplied us some very solid and good information there around that sort of stuff. If I was to make a comment, it would be that although 8 reports have been done, as you've alluded to, since 2008, I've seen over the last 3 years a lot done at a high level with regards to some foundation work, if you like, to allow this sort of stuff to happen. And that's come from that report process. Has it been slow? Yeah, I'd say it's been slow, but hopefully we're speeding that process up now. It's a bit unfortunate, perhaps clarity from council officers again, part of the reasoning why it's taken so long for this to come back to us, will that be in part due to the election cycle?
Yes, so consultation closed early July 2022, I believe, and then we had that hold period over the election where we weren't able to bring items to elected members to discuss, so that they couldn't make a decision for the future council. So this has been the earliest that we've been able to bring that back.
Okay, so the only observation I'd make in relation to that information, if you indulge me, Mr. Chair, is that I'm finding a very different trinium, this trinium than the previous trinium, with regards to getting things done. So please don't take the time frame that's been the situation here as an indicator that this isn't going to go anywhere, or if it does, it's going to go very, very slowly. I'd just like to assure you from what I'm seeing that we're seeing things happen a lot quicker in this trinium, and I'm looking forward to seeing some positive action in this space, I dare say.
Can I comment just briefly?
Sure.
In terms of saying that you're looking at something generally and then the details can be done further down the line, I find it really difficult that you're actually thinking of setting something up where you're actually not very clear about what it's actually going to do. And I would have thought the first thing you have to do is actually what exactly is the problem or series of problems, and then how are you going to tackle them? So in order to make that decision about whether you're actually going to do anything, you have to be clear about what you're actually going to do. In terms of the timescale, I mean, I'm very cynical about the timescale. And all these reports, I mean, some of them are really extensive and very well written, but nothing has actually happened in relation to them on the ground, and that's what bothers me, is that 15 years, I mean, you're a year after the actual housing strategy, and still here we are, talking about whether this may or may not go ahead. And I'm afraid I'm terribly cynical on that point. Anyway, thank you.
John, are you aware that our housing needs assessment has been done to actually address and find out statistically about the need in our district?
Yes, I'm well aware of that, and it's obviously a useful document, and I presume that was partly used to raise funds for infrastructure.
Correct.
But the housing needs were already fairly clear in the district a long time ago. Okay, they might have been adapted slightly or fine-tuned, but really the housing needs haven't changed that much. The same issues arise, the same problems. I mean, just to give you an example, I remember my partner used to work in Housing Corp, and she was walking down the street in Wellington one day, and she'd long since left the organisation, and she met somebody from, it happened to be Dwell, and they said, oh, they're going to a conference about homelessness. And she said, gosh, isn't that funny, you know? I remember doing exactly the same thing 20 years ago, talking about homelessness, and where have we gone? We haven't actually dealt with it.
I'm interested in hearing your thought on this one. Do you consider dealing with homelessness and housing in general, delivery, if you like, a local government priority or a central government priority?
Well, I think if you're asking central government to do it, you're going to be waiting for a hell of a long time. Having worked for Housing Corp, I know how it works. I think the local authorities do have a role. The role might be enabling rather than actually physically doing it. There's a whole way you could organise this. So yes, I think the local authority has a role. And every district's different, so I mean, it's up to the individual districts to decide how they're going to address the problem.
Well, again, John, I can't comment, and I won't comment previous to my last training and being involved here. All I can say is that I've certainly seen progress over the last 3 years, so that the foundation's been built moving forward. We put it as a priority at the beginning of the last triennium, and we've had to put that infrastructure in place. I'm hoping to see that because of that, we see results happening in a more consistent way a lot quicker. But again, the proof's going to be in the pudding, because you're not going to be appeased until you actually see it happen yourself. So appreciate you for coming in.
I'll judge it by the actions I see, not all the words, to be honest.
No, that's more than fair enough. Thank you.
Kia ora. Thank you, John. Appreciate your input tonight. Okay, I've been informed that our first speaker is now online, now becomes our second speaker. So, Chris, welcome, and I invite you to speak. You're speaking on behalf of Community Housing Aotearoa.
Yes, I am. Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity. Again, I'm Chris Glaudel, the Deputy CP with Community Housing Aotearoa. I was also involved with the housing needs assessment, working with our subsidiary, Community Housing Solutions, along with Livingston and Associates on the quantitative analysis of the issues there. And thank you for the opportunity to speak to our submission. We support the council moving forward with establishing an independent community land trust. We think it's a tangible step to begin to address housing needs within the Kapiti district. It won't solve everything. Obviously, it's a multifaceted, and as you had asked, whose responsibility is it? Central? Is it local? I think it's really everybody's, and it involves all levels of government, along with the private sector, with philanthropics, with community housing providers and others. And the CLT provides the council with a tool to work with those various partners and to pull those groups together in a manner that can take land that's made available and pass that along to meet the identified needs and priorities as those evolve over time. It won't solve everything immediately, but it's a necessary, I think, component to have another tool in the toolkit for the district to meet its housing needs. And we would urge that the CLT that's formed plays that role of partnering with the organizations and doesn't transition to become a community housing provider itself. From the research that we did and interviews with community providers already in the area, they're interested in working with Kapiti. It's finding the right opportunities which the CLT could bring to market. And you would just be duplicating the capacity and the skills that are already there, and just adding more complexity and responsibilities onto that entity. And we would also urge you to work with the Wellington Regional Leadership Committee to further explore the idea of inclusionary housing, to ensure that all new housing developments that move forward have a component that would be affordable and meet the identified needs. So with that, I'll stop my comments and open up to any questions that you may have.
Fantastic. Thanks, Chris. I appreciate your thoughts there. Do we have any questions from councillors present for Chris? Chris, I just want to comment, I appreciate your comment about not becoming a CHIP on its own, sorry, a community housing provider on its own. Can you just let me know, and maybe it might be helpful for the councillors around the table, who are the community housing providers that you're interacting with that exist here locally in the Kapiti Coast district?
We know already several that do have housing in the area. So the Salvation Army is active, Dwell Housing Trust. You have Te Ahuru Mowai, just neighboring and part of the district. And then in addition, there are a number of other organizations that are registered and would be interested in working in the area. So there are about 13 registered community housing providers that are already providing homes in the greater Wellington region.
Okay, great. Do you have any idea how many of those would be interested in partnering in Kapiti Coast District?
Well, I know from the interviews that we had as part of the housing needs assessment that probably about half a dozen of those said, yeah, given the right opportunities, they'd be very interested. And I know some Dwell and the Sallies are already looking at active developments. You have the local Paikakariki Housing Trust, which isn't registered. But if the opportunity arose and they had a working relationship with the CLT after it was formed, it would be a way to help that smaller local trust to be able to scale up, to become a provider, and for it to make sense for them.
Okay.
And then others, I can think of, that are active in doing broader work. There's Trust House in the Wairarapa that could extend, that has a large portfolio base to start from. You have Emerge Aotearoa, you have downtown city, not the city mission, but excuse me, I'm just
That's all right.
flustered at the moment on remembering all the local organizations. But yeah, Link People, Emerge Housing, Wesley Community Action, the City Mission, and others that are active in the area.
Great. Plenty of opportunities.
Correct.
Councillor Halliday has a
for-
question for you, Chris.
And during those interviews, what all of them said was key was really trying to find land that was affordable to be able to do something.
Thank you, Chris. I just had a question. You've talked to different entities as part of the housing assessment process. Are they, if we created a space to bring those groups together in one spot to sort of have a collective conversation, is that a way to approach this, or are we best to be leaving those agencies to and form the relationships with them directly and have conversations with them? What do you think would be the best approach?
Through the collective is always a good start, and at Community Housing Aotearoa, we support a Wellington network of those providers that meets quarterly, and we have those collective conversations. We've had engagement. One of your staff has attended a prior meeting, and also Kaingoora and others. So we'd be very happy to facilitate those conversations. And then, the different organizations often have different cohorts that they specialize in working with, or may have just different capacity constraints at different points in time. So it could vary over time as to which of those organizations would be best suited for any particular development opportunity.
Lovely. Thank you very much. That's the only question I had. Thank you.
Fantastic. And Councillor Hanford.
Yeah, kia ora, Chris. Thanks for zooming in from your car. I can tell you're not driving. We're not seeing the trees whizzing past, so that's good. Just a question. You mentioned inclusionary housing or inclusionary zoning, and we heard from Queenstown Lakes Housing Trust around some kind of work that has been done in this space to enable them to be a really effective trust and to deliver those outcomes pretty quickly on the ground. So I'm just wondering, how crucial do you see provision of inclusionary housing being in enabling a land trust of this nature to kind of maximise its impact on the ground? Because I think from what we've heard, it sounds like a pretty important lever to be trying to pull. So I'm just kind of keen to get a sense of how crucial you see that to be.
Access to the land is one of the biggest constraints in providing affordable housing. And so if you have that ongoing pipeline that's delivered through an inclusionary housing program, you're assured that you're going, as market rate development moves forward in the district and it's projected to occur, that a certain percentage would be available for social and affordable housing. And so you can have a community land trust without it, but then you have to look at, okay, how do we capitalize it? How does it then acquire land assets that can be used to provide housing? And so what we see is, when land changes and becomes developed land or gets its consent, that the value increases at that point in time. A portion of that could be held and used for community needs. And that's a very effective way to ensure that you have balanced communities, that the needs are being met, and that you don't end up with just one typology, one tenure that's developed, but you get a diversity for the community.
Kia ora, thank you.
All right. No other questions? Okay, sounds like we're done with our questions for you, Chris. I really appreciate your time and zooming in for us to contribute to our conversation tonight. Thank you.
I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you. Kia ora.
We're just waiting. I'm just trying to work out who we've got next in here for being able to speak next. So, Paul, can we welcome you to come and speak?
Something I've never done before, but
Kia ora, we're safe. It's a safe place. Some of us aren't great at speaking around this table either, so.
With regards to my submission to the proposed trust, my initial reaction to it was, no, I'm not keen at all. And I object to the premise that KCDC should invest in council-owned and managed housing. So I think Councillor Halliday is sort of teetering on that. So during my working life, I was involved with almost every council in New Zealand with regard to their building maintenance programs. And I found that most were very lacking. And in hindsight, which is a fabulous thing when it's boiled down to the human element, of people not looking after council buildings maintenance because they don't have skin in the game, and therefore not looking after the asset as they would their own. So you end up in a situation where you have deferred maintenance that just gets out of hand. Wellington City Council was a classic example of that, with an $800 million bill to fix 4,000 units. So someone who has made multiple property investments in Kapiti and other regions around the place, I've experienced many different and unique living arrangements, and this has become more obvious in the last few years as there is a significant increase in desire for alternatives to the cookie cutter 3-bedroom quarter-acre section, or what's currently being offered, which seems to be 1 and 2 bedroom flats on a postage stamp next to 20 other people. I recognise that these units are manufactured or produced because of constraints of land, and what is being offered by the developers is not everybody's cup of tea, especially when it comes to the amount of money that's involved. So I wanted to make sure that all housing alternatives are considered by council when, should this trust go ahead, and that the community does not end up subsidising whatever options are chosen. Assuming that we're all living in the region, we're all ratepayers, and every council flat, every dollar that is spent comes out of our pocket. So I don't really like rates going up every year. When I've inquired to a lot of the councils that I used to work with, they only offered housing, as it turns out, to be the continuation of what the councils in the UK used to offer. And many New Zealand councils have now divested from council-owned housing. There's not that many left that actually still have them. So I'd like to see a more flexible approach to housing, upon which investigating KCDC publications and past surveys, there also seems to be quite a bit of interest from some council members and quite a few community members. Recently there's been a proposal put to the Tasman district area to encourage even cooperative living on rural land and eco-village zoning. So a presentation from Zola Rose, who was the Director of Common Ground, was the catalyst for this plan. And I can provide a copy of that presentation if anyone wants one, and I've included the details on my printed thing here, which I'm happy to leave with you. So this has come as a result of researching the Canadian eco-village zoning rules, the UK Ecological Land Cooperative, and the Welsh Government One Planet Development Planning Rule, Guide and Zone, all proven in operational plans. So these types of living arrangements are not for everybody, but they are desired by many, and that number seems to be growing, especially when it comes to dollars. The simple affordability of a tiny home is very appealing, because as your own proposals have pointed out, the average house in Kapiti is $690,000. The average tiny home is about $160,000. So, but sure, there's no land involved at that point. But to make land available for long-term lease at a reasonable rate and put tiny homes on that people want to live in might be an option. So I guess in a nutshell, through personal experience and business experience, witnessing, discussing, interacting with, and having been responsible for a variety of housing situations, I have maintained, bought, sold, refurbished, replaced, operated B&Bs, rented rooms, had bedsits, single rooms, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom, 27-bedroom houses, in the Kapiti region, and had such an assortment of tenants in amongst that. Some good, most good, some bad, some requiring special care. Recently, we've just had one of our tenants move out, which is Hohepa, and yeah, they were a bit special. But all of this, and I found that there is no one size fits all. So if the council wishes to deliver affordable housing outcomes in the Kapiti Coast District, which is sort of what we're talking about here, then there needs to be some new things done. And I guess I don't want to be the ratepayer that ends up funding the same but different plan. So I'll end with a quote from Albert Einstein. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing again and again and expecting a different result. So I'm happy to leave that with you if you want some communication details. But
Thank
that's really all I wanted to say.
Great. Thank you, Paul. You couldn't really tell that you're not familiar with speaking. So thank you.
Not really.
Thank you for your presentation and the thoughts there. We've got a couple of lights on already from councillors with questions, so I'll go to Councillor Halliday.
Actually, I'll defer and let another speaker go first. I'll go after that.
Okay, well, that's
Thanks,
you.
Paul. You're just
Councillor
demonstrating that
Cofer.
there's a wealth of knowledge and experience on the Kapiti Coast there. Thank you very much. You're right with the question about land. I think land is the key thing here. If we can identify land and sort of just be trustees to it or whatever, it's very important. Julie Scott gave us a report on her development in Queenstown, and they were selling houses with really cheap land, and then the new owners would sell them for a massive profit and leave the place. So they have that land sorted out now, so they actually own the land and you have a licence to occupy. So these details have been looked at. And then there's a question of use of the land, housing for the elderly, transitional housing, and really economic housing. And I think we're getting really good briefings and experience from people like yourselves. And there's a wealth of experience. Our Paparam Rotary Club, when it was going, actually built Seven Oaks as it started off as a club project, and it just grew from there, and it's highly successful. So if it's done properly, it's really successful, and it's with the right maintenance, as you say, it's sustainable. But as you say, you've got to look after the buildings and look after the land ownership. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Coford. Councillor Hanford.
Yeah, kia ora, Paul. Thanks for your
Hi.
time and your experience and expertise that you've shared with us. I am totally on board with the kind of tiny home potential and the ability to kind of build really resilient and affordable communities that prioritise, as you say, kind of what each individual person would want to call a home, and the fact that if there was land made available for that sort of thing, that it could accommodate that. So I'm just wondering whether you see a community land trust as being the best model to deliver that, and therefore what you would see to be council's role in facilitating that. Obviously, in establishing the community land trust that could help to drive those conversations, connecting in the right people and groups and community housing providers, or the likes of inclusionary housing measures. But what's the role that you see, I guess, council to be playing in that, and how would you see it to be set up so the community land trust could have the biggest impact on delivering what you're talking about? Because I completely support it.
I guess the council, I see the council role as rezoning some of the area that is available. I mean, you don't get reasonable sized pieces of land that you could set up tiny home community on just down the road. Although in Kapiti there are some very large pieces of land, but they're all spoken for. One of the presentations or the surveys that I read on council website involved rezoning some of the Hauteri area, and there were a number of respondents that said yes, they were pretty keen to look at that, especially for the unproductive areas of Hauteri, the areas where you've got lots of totara trees that you can't touch. things like that. So just, areas at the moment, I think the smallest subdivision you can have up there is 10 acres. So what do you do? What are you going to do with that? And now that we have a lovely expressway that runs virtually to the front door, that might be an option.
Great. Councillor Halliday.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've sort of got two questions. The first one refers to the CLT. From my perspective, and please bear with me here, from my perspective, the CLT is just one option, or one lever that we'll be pulling in this space. It's not the lever, it's just a lever. And I guess if I'm to make a comparison, we landed the economic development strategy in the last triennium, and part of that process was having an independent economic development board on there as well. And it was to bring that expertise into those spaces rather than council running that space as such, or to give it oversight if you like. I see a similar sort of comparison here with regards to the CLT is looking to be at arm's length from council. If you like, the governance or management of it will be done by the community with regards to experts or people that have the skill sets in that space. And the inclusionary zoning, if it comes through or when it comes through, which more likely is a bit further on down the track, will be a pathway with regards to bringing potentially cost-effective land into that equation, which then that group can be looking at how best for it to be utilised by the community, if you like, with the different options that we've got. Do you think having that CLT as an option, rather than the option, is a good positive step if we move through with regards to
definitely? I think it's part of the solution.
Yeah.
I understand that we're expecting a lot of people have shown interest in moving here.
Yes.
Obviously they can't at the moment because there is no housing. People can't move in where there is nowhere to move. So
my second question is just, I wanted to tease out, you talked a flexible approach. In your experiences with, you've obviously got a vast range of interactive experience here, I guess, both I'm sure dealing with council, but dealing with other organisations as well. When you say flexible approach, are you talking that we need to be working better in partnership with the requirement rather than completely adhering to the regulatory side of things as such? Are you finding it's a bit rigid in that space? And I hear a lot of frustration with, look, it'd just be easy to do this and just be easy to do that. But the regulations don't allow that to happen as such.
From my experience, you've hit the nail directly on the head.
Right.
There needs to be some wiggle room within some of the, because as I said, one size does not fit all, and that applies to where and how and what size and how many you fit on a piece of land and who wants to live there and how you deal with that. It's the regulations, I'm assuming, have been designed with a criteria in mind, but that criteria is constantly moving. It's not a stationary object.
Yeah, and I dare say that the council processes tend to be, because it's quite heavily legislated, tend to be a bit slower than a bit faster than, say, responding if you're a commercial entity, private commercial entity as such, and got the flexibility to do that. But it's trying to find that ground where we can do that as well.
Yeah, I wish you luck on that. But
yeah. So it's top of the list, with regards to sorting that out. But thank you very much for your feedback. Very much appreciated.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Paul. Appreciate that. All right, next on the list we've got Bruce. Welcome, Bruce.
Thank you. Kia ora. My name is Bruce Taylor. I'm a resident of Waikanae. I'm here to support the Community Land Trust in principle and to urge you to take political action to get it going. I was very pleased to see it proposed. The middle of last year, it was made public, because something needs to be done to get affordable houses constructed in Kapiti. I was in this room in, I think, 2018. There were submissions being made. Might have been 2019. We'd had the Housing Task Force that reported in 2018, but nothing tangible seems to have been done since. I know from my own experience from campaigning in the area, or supporting campaigning, not as a candidate, for a major political party on a number of occasions, that there is a real need for housing improvement in this district. There's homelessness. There's a shocking standard of rental accommodation in some parts of the area. For example, in the town of Otaki. We have high rents, which some of our elderly superannuitants cannot afford. It's been pointed out that the average rent in Kapiti could not be afforded, the average median rent could not be afforded by a person who's solely dependent on the national superannuation. There is vacant public land. It's been pointed out there's land, I think, still available along the expressway, which is controlled by Waka Kotahi. So we have a serious situation here. You wouldn't think so looking at the mainstream media. There's not the coverage that there should be. Current government has said we have a housing crisis and they're acting to meet it. But all levels of government need to act. In a rich country like New Zealand, this is a disgraceful situation. Housing stress is extensive. Your own website says this. You've got a YouTube video pointing out the dimensions to this, and this was based, of course, on what the council's done. Now, I must say in my written submission, I, as the Americans say, misspoke. I said that nothing has been done by the council since the presentation of the Housing Task Force. I was getting a bit carried away there, so I withdraw that statement. I would commend the council on the things they have done, such as the housing strategy and the housing needs assessment. And there also are various reports which are being commissioned by the council. So there has been action, particularly in the last triennium on housing. I believe that local councils have a responsibility to get involved in housing, and in this case, this proposal is to join with appropriate partners in getting affordable houses built. A lot of the details still need to be sorted out, as one of the other submitter has said, but the principle is important and we need to get on with doing something. Councils, as I can remind you, of course, have an important role in community well-being, and housing is central to community well-being and personal well-being. This council has the resources, such as financial, staffing and local knowledge, and particularly the land. And it has the relationships with central government agencies, which will help it establish the trust. So you are clearly the body which could initiate the trust. Now, it's not a cure-all, as other submitters have said, but it's something that can be done. A couple of cautionary notes to end with. The deed of the trust must be carefully written to prevent rip-off on selling by people who buy houses, such as happened in Queenstown. So get that trust right, get that deed of the trust right, and secondly, make sure you fund the trust properly. Don't set it up to fail. One way you could fund it is to charge the developers. If you change the zoning, I understand from, say, rural to medium density housing, you could make, and of course the value of that medium density housing land goes up considerably. You could charge the developers and avoid having to charge the ratepayers or use ratepayers' money. Personally, I said in my submission, I'm prepared to pay a bit extra because in a rich country like New Zealand, we need to address the housing problem.
Kia ora, Bruce. Thank you. I hear your passion about this particular area and a level of frustration, as I think I've heard from a couple of other presenters, around getting something happening. And so I note that. We do have a question or a couple of questions. So we'll go to Councillor Cofford
It's
first.
more of a comment, thanks. Yeah, Bruce, thanks for that. You'll be heartened to know that we've had quite a few conversations with councillors and council staff just over the last 2 months over this, and there even has been serious talk about an urban panel being formed to help formulate this along. But yeah, I think you're talking in terms of partnerships with developers or whoever. But as you say, it's ratepayers' money. We can liaise, we can identify the land and see the proper use for it, and we're actually currently getting very looking at that, and I'm getting really enthused with it. But yeah, we'll take all of those comments on board, and yeah, we've got to be really careful. But if it's done properly, it can be a resounding success, as it has been shown in Queenstown. All these firms have gone through the learning process, and they've seen what can go wrong, and we can pick up from that, and we're in a really good space. Thank you. And also Kapiti Youth Support, for instance, they're looking at homeless young people who are in trouble, and they have sort of transitional housing needs, and so a lot of work has been done at the moment. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Actually, mine's a little more comment orientated as well, rather than question orientated. Bruce, thank you for your input. It's much appreciated. You mentioned that you'd been involved in, I'm assuming, central government campaigns with regards to electioneering and that sort of scenario. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
Yeah. So I guess what question I do have is that, do you think we're getting enough advocacy from our local MPs in this space, considering housing delivery really is a central government job?
I believe that housing delivery is a central and local government job, and that is certainly the position of the current government. So this council is expected to get on with meeting housing needs, or helping meet housing needs in whatever way it does. Have the local MPs advocated effectively or not to central government? I assume you're asking.
Well, they are central government. So I guess what my question is revolving around, are we as a community lobbying our MPs strongly enough with regards to housing provision in this space? Do we think we do?
No, I don't think we are. But I mean, I don't know what council members here or the mayor says when they meet the local MPs, plural. I don't personally have knowledge of all the detailed activities of the two Labor MPs who cover this area and what they've been doing. I certainly think they're highly aware of the housing needs. My point, well, one of my points is that the community generally is not that aware unless they're personally affected.
That's a fair comment. I just wanted to comment, you talk about principles being important. I 100% agree. I think you'll find what happened at the last triennium is that from a principle approach, we were sick and tired of the government not delivering in this space and wanted to start some proactive approaches with regards to how do we go about delivery in our own way, because when and how does local start helping local? Problem is that, as was described to me today again, changing course on a council is like, shifting the course on the Titanic, so to speak, hopefully before it hits an iceberg. But the reason I say that is that a lot of things have been put in place high-level things have been put in place over the last 3 years, and I guess what we're looking at doing here is this is, again, one of those levers, but we need other levers as well. And part of the problem we have is, of course, is that we don't get much help from central government in this space. In fact, if anything, they get in the way. They make it hard for us to get involved. In fact, we can't hold our own housing because we, as a council, the flow-through benefits that applies to housing providers doesn't apply to councils. Go figure. So it's actually very expensive for us to be involved in that space. So we're looking at other alternatives for that. So I guess what I'm saying is that this triennium, it's again been identified as highly important, and we're getting closer and closer to the rock face. And I'm sure when Donna presents to us, if she is today. I don't actually see her down here. She may, you know, that's a circle that is dealing with the homelessness, and we've got Steve here as well, who are dealing in those realms as well. And we're starting to get to the space where hopefully we can start actually seeing some results, some tangible results in that space. You know, we're getting closer rather than further away, which is, I think, a good step. It's just a shame we're not able to get there a heck of a lot quicker than what we are.
Councillor Hanford.
Kia ora, Bruce. Good to see you. And also just acknowledging what Councillor Halliday was saying in terms of having Steve Flood in the audience. Thank you, Steve, because you've been a huge part of enabling us to be in the position that we are now and saying that we've been able to do a bunch of work over the last 3 years. So I just want to acknowledge you and your mahi. Bruce, you talked about obviously the need for housing and the dire situation and stories that sit behind some people's experience with housing currently. And I'm wondering how you approach having conversations with people when you've got to manage that tension between some people being kind of a bit NIMBY about the thing, so not in my backyard, having that sort of approach, but sitting alongside the fact that we need housing. How do you think we have those conversations with the community, and how do you personally approach those sorts of conversations? Because I'm very much in a similar boat to you, is we just need to get on with enabling housing wherever we can put it, because our people need, you know, warm, dry, affordable housing. But how do we also balance that with the fact that what we're hearing from some members of our community is that they don't want it in their backyard?
Well, yes, it is a challenge. I think you've got to approach it from a principled point of view that people need to be housed, and explain to those people who object to, say, medium density housing next to them, but the need of these people and community wellbeing overrides your individual desires. You could be a bit more blunt and say, well, this is government policy and the councils have been instructed to do this, and we're getting on with it. I wouldn't compare it perhaps to a wartime situation, but we need to take action. And to some extent, NIMBYism has to be overridden. I mean, it's easy for me to say this. I don't have to personally engage in these conversations, but, you know, I know, for example, Waikanae Beach, people they're mobilising there to try and oppose, as I understand it, medium density housing. Well, we're just going to have to accept that there will be some medium density housing. We can't just keep expanding outwards all the time.
You know, follow up, Martin. I'm going to be nice to you, aren't I?
Yes, I have got a follow-up question on it. And look, I do hear you. I'm too minded of NIMBYism because I do believe that we do need to get on with it. But I find Kapiti is a slightly different district than a lot of places, and part of what makes Kapiti, in my opinion, the place that it is some of those character areas, either the beach area, the garden area. And when we start talking about medium density, I think it's more appropriate potentially in our transport hubs, you know, along our transport corridor, so to speak, rather than closer down to the beach where we're sort of away from infrastructure, so to speak. So you think that with regards to, not so much NIMBYism, but I guess that balance between NIMBYism or maintaining the character of our area versus also that medium density housing, because we're getting a lot of it coming through in this more urban area here in Parapara Umi now. But do you think we should be keeping those character areas as part of the identity of who we are, or really should it be the way the government's sort of doing at the moment, which is quite a broad brushstroke approach to it, with regards to 3 houses on, 3 stories up, and medium density and high density housing around the place?
Oh, I definitely agree with you that we should be keeping the character areas, particularly if the council's got the ability to do that. But maybe the council has to approve every medium density development put up by a developer, I don't know. But certainly areas like Waikanae Beach has a very distinctive character, for example.
I mean, I get it because us being a Tier 1 council, we seem to have a lot of rules being applied to us, which really on the fringes I don't think really do apply to us. I think, you know, there can be quite sensible approaches to intensification, if you like, that doesn't need to impact on our character areas so much. Keeping in mind that we do need to be providing more housing than what we currently are. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Halliday. We're possibly moving beyond the the public speaking time in the submissions around the Community Land Trust and moving into District Plan 2 and the conversations that are happening currently around the place, it is still relevant, but we do need to maintain our focus here, which is around submissions on an affordable housing entity. So unless there's any other questions for for Bruce, Bruce, we thank you for your time and your presentation tonight. Appreciate that.
Thank you. Kia ora.
Next on the list is Malu. Kia ora, Malu.
Kia ora.
Welcome.
Kia ora. I'm going to wing this without paper, partly because I was a bit confused as to the overlap between Community Land Trust and PC2 anyway, so thank you for clarifying that.
Yes.
So I ended up being invited to both and having signed on for both and having already spoken about PC2. However, it's been really interesting listening to the people beforehand, and I just want to clarify quickly that I'm not a fence sitter, but I can see the points of view of NIMBY as well as the urgent need. I want to make that really, really clear. I am a Kapiti Coast resident since 1991, and before getting married, I always had people living in my home who were on the fringes of society, and happily had them living with me to help house them. And since my marriage ended, I've done exactly the same thing. So I am personally very, very familiar with the need, here on the Kapiti Coast for the last 30 years, not just in the Kapiti Coast, but clearly that's been my experience. So I have been housing people ranging from pregnant women to women with preschoolers to 64-year-olds, many people who've come straight out of hospital who need long-term, sort of like a halfway house type situation, recovering from serious brain aneurysms, often that sort of situation. I cannot personally cope with people with very serious addiction issues. There have been some who have been there with less serious addiction issues, and the very, very difficult cases I have not been able to deal with, and I'm very aware of the wraparound support that some people need. So most of the time, like one of the previous speakers, I could say most of the experiences have been really awesome, really, really good, and amazingly, win-win in terms of human interaction, and very occasionally I've had to ask somebody to leave just for everybody's well-being and safety, and that's been very distressing to me, but I've had to always make a call for that. So on the other hand, I'm also somebody who's brought up in a very shady house. We're not talking about shady in the dark movie sense. We're just talking about lack of sunshine. And I am with my NIMBY hat on. I don't want a place built right next to my home that is multi-storey, that's going to rob my property of sunshine. I've got solar panels on my roof. I grow a lot of food in my backyard. I'm not on a high income. That's my retirement plan. That's how I'm going to live sustainably on the Kapiti Coast and contribute to lower fuel emissions, is by generating my own power and my own food. Now, if somebody builds a high-rise right next to me to house people who need to be housed, I don't feel that's really fair. I've worked really hard to be here. I haven't inherited any of it. And any of you who are living in a rural zone surrounded by paddocks, you don't have to worry about that. No, if you're in a rural zone, you don't have to worry about a high-rise going up next to you, only 6 metres away. You don't have to worry if you are living on the coast, looking out over the sea every day with just you and the sea to look at. There's no room for a high-rise to go there to take away your sun. And I don't consider sun to be an amenity value. For me, it is the way I feed myself for the whole year. And it's the way I feed other people too, because I produce far too much food. And it's the way I generate power on my home. I don't see any provision in the proposals from council for us to actually safeguard places on the coast that do produce food well. Housing's really important, but can we please also look at how we're going to feed our local population? And this is before Cyclone Gabriel. That's the way I was thinking. Please, can we make sure we safeguard our good productive soils on the coast and don't just fill them up with concrete? We build up on places, hopefully, where the soil is not so good. Please let us look at our soils critically and build up to house people affordably in places where we're not going to impact on food production, not just my backyard, but other places that produce food already. I've got amazing, mature trees on my property, both food-bearing and not food-bearing, and all of them provide ecosystems, but some of them provide a hell of a lot of food as well, and I don't see any value being put on those in our quest for cheap housing. When we need cheap housing, I make that really, really clear, but we must do it in places where we lose the least trees, where we lose the least mature trees. We are here looking for resilience in our community as well as affordability. We want sustainability in every way. So please don't just put roofs and concrete ahead of sustainability for our community in terms of local food production as well as local ecosystems. We call ourselves Nature Coast. Well, we may as well not call ourselves Nature Coast if we fill ourselves with concrete. We saw what happened in Auckland, where there weren't enough natural engineering solutions for the rain recently. We can do it better. We can do it better here. We can learn from the mistakes from other places, where Simon Upton has just recently written a report worried that Auckland and Hamilton have lost 30% and 20% of their green space in the last 10 years. We can do it better than that. We must build up in places where there's already lots of concrete and asphalt. Do not do it in the places that are predominantly green unless it is a paddock that is next to our suburbs. Please don't do it in places that already have got our taonga growing there. We have amazing trees on this coast. Please give them a value, because once they've gone, they're gone. Same with good soil. Once the good soil's gone, it's gone. We can put concrete anywhere. We can plant little shrubs and little grasses anywhere, but we can't produce a huge tree in the next 10, 20 years. So I just ask that we do these communities, these affordable housing entities that go up, but please let us place them in places where they have less negative impacts on our food resilience, on our stormwater resilience, and on our ecosystems. And let us also look at solar power and wind power for these places as well, because we may as well look at these things, vertical gardens, roof gardens. Let us look at these things while we build them, while we design them. Should be easy to accommodate things like that while we're in this design phase, while we're thinking this through. Shouldn't hold us up. Lots of places in the world have done this, and we can do it. And we have to learn from the mistakes that some of our cities further north have experienced, because we don't want to follow in their footsteps.
Excellent. Thank you, Malu. Can I just ask you one question there? I know the others have got one. In regards to the Community Land Trust, are you in support of us doing something like that?
Absolutely. And I'm
in the context of all the building
absolutely
stuff? Yes,
fully in support of it, and I'm totally excited and inspired by hearing the previous speaker talking about rural eco hamlets as well, and tiny homes. Absolutely. And I also think that we have got a situation here where quite a few people have large sections, large houses, and there would probably be quite a large uptake of people if they were given this option where they could subdivide those large homes legally, and that the council actually encouraged that to occur. And where tiny homes could be put in people's backyards. At the moment, these things are not able to be done. I think this is a multi-pronged approach. You know, that there are lots of ways to provide extra housing in this district if we are more creative in the way we think about it and we prioritise that. So if somebody's got a piece of land that they want to put 2 tiny homes on, why don't we let them? You know, I just don't understand why not. I don't get it, because we know the needs are there and we know people want to live here, and there are ways of doing it, and yet there are still these restrictions that seem really archaic. And as far as the transport hubs go, I can tell you now, I live within 800 metres of the Waikanae railway station. So I'm in a 6-storey zone for PC2. But on that side in Waikanae, we have a primary school that caters for Waikanae Beach. We have only one road that goes in and out. Bottlenecks every day. No fire station, no medical facilities there, no supermarket. And that side of Waikanae is only getting more and more populated already. That's great. But we've only got one legal road in and out, and where most of the kids who go to that school don't even live on that side of the railway track. We need another school.
Yep. So there's a lot of questions around infrastructure that
Yeah.
go around this
But that
conversation.
particular part of Waikanae is
Yep.
not in the same situation as the rest of the rest of the Kapiti Coast. All the other places have got an exit and an entrance that you could use in the event of a fire or an emergency. We got the Akatarua Road.
Yep, agreed. We've got some challenges with Waikanae over that area.
Yeah.
I will move to questions now for Councillor Hanford.
Kia ora Malu. Just a quick question. You talked a lot about kind of various sustainability and emissions reduction opportunities, which I think, totally in support of doing that. I'm just wondering, and I loved what you're talking about in terms of getting creative about how we start to facilitate some of these opportunities for more housing in the right places for the right people. So would you see kind of through the establishment of some sort of a community land trust, which as you said, you're quite supportive of, that if we kind of have that, and John talked earlier on quite eloquently about all the different considerations we would need to make in terms of supporting it with a really clear purpose, and one of those kind of overlays and purpose to be sustainability, and as you're talking about food sovereignty, low emissions, energy sovereignty as well, energy resilience, community gardens, and how communities are built. So we're not just necessarily thinking about providing the land for the housing, but how that then builds community. Is that something that you're
absolutely
also
I'm passionate about it? Absolutely passionate about that whole picture. I think if we look through a narrow lens of housing, then we're doing our community a disservice. We've got so many taonga here in terms of the sunshine, the rainfall. We've got and the people and the desire to do things better and differently. This is an opportunity.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Councillor Hanford. Sorry, Halliday.
I don't seem like I'm coming across a little bit harsh here, but
You can come across
no,
as
it's
harsh
not that
as
so
you
much
like.
because you make all your points are completely valid, very, very valid. I don't disagree with anything you've said. No, look, it's my situation is I've downsized to a 60 square metre house, which I've upcycled, and I'm having 3 houses built next door to me that will get fast tracked through the legislated plan. So I'm not that happy about that, but there's not something I can actually do about it. I sympathise very much with what you're saying. But you are aware that those sorts of provisions are legislated to us by central government.
Yes.
These aren't rules that council's made up.
I'm aware of that, and I do think that was also written in that the medium density regulations were designed with good intentions, absolutely, and I can see why. Firstly, it's meant to be along rapid transit routes, which I sort of question sometimes when you are dependent on the train. But we are in a situation also where not only are we living in Waikanae, over an hour away from Wellington, is that most of the people I know, and maybe I have a restricted social circles, most of them actually don't work in Wellington. And many people are not wanting to commute, and they're wanting to work from home far more now, especially in this post-COVID era. And I think perhaps a lot of that was written with a view to large swathes of people wanting to commute, and therefore we have to house them near the railway line. Actually, I see a lot more need of connectivity within the Kapiti district, which is not just predicated along that railway line. And I see more potential, for example, with electric-powered minivans to help shuttle people along smaller stretches that are not necessarily along that north-south route, because people actually have to go all sorts of directions within Kapiti Coast, and north-south is not really catering for most people.
So would it be a fair comment then to say that, taking what you've just said on board, you would appreciate that the CLT is one lever we can pull?
Yes.
and you're supportive of
Yes.
that. Because what I am hearing, but also I would like to think what our direction is that we're wanting to try and approach this from a multi-pronged
Good.
approach. What we're trying to put in place at the moment is the vehicles to do that and the
Cool.
ability to do that. As I said, she can be a bit of a heavy ship to steer, especially when we have central government throwing things at us that make that harder to achieve those outcomes. So thank you very much for your input. It was a very different approach to the conversation, which I fully respect.
Well, I'm not a specialist in community land trusts, but I also gather there are some other communities who are raising a few red flags to central government about the broad brush approach with the medium density regulations.
I think we're one of them.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that we're going to be one of them with good reasons, not just a sort of like a black and white NIMBYism, not at all.
No, not at all.
I think if we actually look at it through a positive lens of how to do it better, and not just along that narrow rapid transit route corridor thing, because actually there's far more important elements for our district.
And I think what you've highlighted, and it's very, very correct, is that we have a very different community up here in a good way.
We have a series of communities too.
And we do. We do have lots of. We're an area of townships as such, and this Tier 1 council status that we find ourselves in regards to being on the fringes of Wellington, I think needs to be questioned quite heavily.
I agree.
As well. And
I think topographically we don't actually fit that model very well at all.
I agree. But that's a P2 conversation, sorry, Mr. Chair, and I will keep it at a CLT level. And thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Might be a bit late, Councillor Halliday. It's like closing the gate after the horse has bolted. Anyway, we'll move on. Thank you so much, Malu, for your contribution to our conversation tonight. I have our next speaker, which is Denise Hapeta, and she is speaking on behalf of Ngā Hapu o Otaki, and we have her online with us. Kia ora, Denise. Nice to see you.
Yes, tēnā koutou. It's good to see you all again. Some of you I've already seen today, but it's good to see you again.
You're welcome to start your presentation, Denise.
Well, I was just thinking about what my presentation might be. I'm just going to make a comment actually, because I really just want to share Ngā Hapu o Otaki's, I guess gratitude is one word. Gratitude in terms of one of the initiatives that Kapiti Coast District Council have pursued in terms of establishing housing here in Otaki with the support of the Better Off Housing Fund. So we have expressed this to Council on earlier occasions, but for the purpose of tonight's public meeting, and my apologies, my intent was to be down there tonight, but we closed off the hearing at the plan change hearing very late at about 5:45 this afternoon, so I wasn't able to join you in person. But we just want to share, our opinion and support for the establishment of the proposed Otaki Community Trust, which is going to be supported through the Kapiti Better Off Placement Housing Fund through that opportunity, and it's a welcome, venture from Ngā Hapu o Otaki, welcome venture that Kapiti Coast are looking to participate in and engage in terms of establishment of housing in Otaki, with the engagement of an Otaki-based developed community trust organisation to help, facilitate and work alongside Kapiti District Council in initiating that, looking at options and design options for our community here in Otaki, and really just wanted to express our gratitude. We came to the table some years ago, and we found a stronger voice around 2021, 2020, 2021 with Council through Ngā Hapu o Otaki, and have had several opportunities on a regular occasion to sit with Council and describe what we've identified as a high need in Otaki for affordable housing, where a lot of local residents, not necessarily just Ngā Hapu o Otaki members, but where a lot of local residents have been forced out of the town because, one, they can't afford the rentals, or the type of rental they're looking for are unavailable, or because other Crown agencies are deeming that other people have greater priorities than a lot of our own local people. So we came to the council with that request, and I guess request to be able to help us establish some housing in Otaki that would be affordable over the next 5 years or so. In addition to Ngā Hapu being able to provide iwi land itself to be able to stand up housing in Otaki for our people in Otaki. So my purpose tonight, and what I really wanted to be here, was to share with other people and other members of the public and where Ngā Hapu or Otaki are currently positioned, and wanted to share publicly our gratitude to Kapiti Coast District Council for the work being able to do to date. And the outlook is looking a lot more promising than it did in 2021. And in planning terms and in partnership terms, achieving what we've done in the last 2 years is what I would deem a quantum leap to where we were in 2020 and 2021. Just want to, I only got to hear one other speaker earlier talking about the district plan changes. So we've had a full day at Otaki hearing a number of submissions on the district plan changes, including this afternoon having a 2.5 hour session, 3 hour session actually, listening to Kāinga Ora share their own perspective and I guess policies on working with the recommended intensification across the Wellington region, including Otaki, and particularly what that is potentially going to look like for Otaki. So it's nice to get a full view of where all interested parties are currently positioned in terms of the proposed district plan changes, and more importantly, proposed intensification plans for Otaki, in what is one of the smallest communities in the Kapiti Coast. So really that's all I had to say, but just wanted to say thank you to Janet and the team and the other senior leaders at Kapiti Coast District Council for their support today. And yeah, we look forward to ongoing discussions in the next few weeks and in future months in terms of what that's going to provide to our community here in Otaki. I'm happy to take questions.
Kia ora, Denise. Thank you. There doesn't look like there's any questions.
What you looking at me for?
Well, you just turned it on, did you?
Yeah, too right. I'm
Okay.
going to ask a question now.
Councillor Halliday's got a question for you, Denise.
Look, I actually don't have a question as such. It's something I just wanted to highlight. And first of all, say thank you, Denise, for bringing that in. And I just, I guess the other people that have presented here tonight, perhaps we've talked about different levers that are being pulled to achieve outcomes. The CLT is one of them. What Denise has just been talking to is another one that's been working on behind the scenes as well. There are other ones as well. So I guess, John, you know, in regards to what you're saying about result, we are getting there and we are getting closer to the rock face. You know, thank you, Denise, because that was quite timely, you coming in and saying that. I had heard, I mean, I guess if I was asked a question, just a confirmation, one of the comments that stood out to me, not tonight, but a comment in general that's been made, is that Ngā Hapu have found that council officers coming to work with you, you've been quite impressed with the way that they've been looking to find out how best to work with you, rather than saying how it should be, so to speak. Would you care to comment on that?
Kia ora, Martin. Yeah, happily. I've shared it on numerous occasions with council members in a range of different forums recently. Just wanted to say that coming to the table as strangers, I guess back in 2021, 2020, which is exactly where we were, coming in as strangers as the newly formed committee for Ngā Hapu Otaki. And just with really a mandate from our people to say your task is to find more houses for our people and help bring our people home. So that has been the primary task, along with some other matters, but primarily that has been the primary task. And so we've worked with a number of people who have come to us to offer possible solutions that could suit our people, where design is not going to impact on our waterways, where costs potentially are going to be affordable, where the style of housing being proposed is as a mix. So it's not necessarily just for elderly people, it's not just for young families, it's not just for people who have capacity to, I guess, jump onto the the ladder of first home owners. But we've encouraged council and other developers we've been working with to develop housing or ōtaki that suits the community wide, not just a particular area, and not just particularly those people who want to come, who live elsewhere and just want a holiday home in ōtaki, but really people in our community who are third, fourth generation people who want their children to grow up in ōtaki. So developing little communities in ōtaki where they can do that with all age groups and all the different age groups within their family or in their community, but people that they will already know from the community. An opportunity to have a housing development here in ōtaki that reflects that and offers that has come about through council hearing our stories over the last few years. And I'll just say, as recently as last week, we had probably the most recent draft of the proposal on the table, and I've got to say it was pretty much all smiles at the table. We're very, very pleased. So Martin, I just want to say, yes, we have been, and personally I'd have to say that regardless of what level the discussions have occurred, whether that's at the council with governance, whether that with essentially with senior leaders or with staff who are working to achieve the council's goals and policies. To date, I personally and our team have enjoyed the experience to date. And I want to thank everyone, absolutely, for where we are today.
Thank you. Thank you, Denise. The reason I wanted to highlight that was simply not to just keep digging out good news stories. Council does get at the neck a fair bit with regards to things, and I've been quite at the front of that a few times. But it's good to hear the good stories as well, and I guess it just highlights that we are heading hopefully in the right direction with regards to how we're engaging moving forward. I'm quite excited in this space, and housing is under my committee, so I'm looking forward to seeing some good outcomes. Thank you.
Very good.
And yours.
Thank you, Martin. Councillor Hanford.
Kia ora, Denise. Just a quick partai, but also a thank you to you as well. Like you've thanked staff and thanked those around the table, but also thank you to yourself, to Ngā Hapu more broadly for your continued strength and advocacy and just your unwavering kind of voice of clarity and vision. So it's so much appreciated and really valued around the table. Just have a question around the Community Land Trust and its potential to, I guess, support and enable papakainga. Obviously, there are other levers through which we'll seek to work alongside yourselves to do that, if that's an aspiration. But I'm just thinking down in Paikakiriki, for example, we've got Ngāti Haumia ki Paikakiriki who are really keen to kind of see their whānau come back home because they're really keen to understand what a marae for Paikakiriki could look like, but obviously for a marae to be a living whare and a living and breathing place that requires housing. So do you see there to be any role for a community land trust to, I guess, partner with mana whenua to actualise those?
I think, kia ora, Sophie. Look, I think that's an interesting point, and thinking of our Ngāti Haumia whānau down there in Paikakiriki, with whom we've sat at the table on a range of other matters recently themselves with Ngāti Toa. But I think a community trust, housing trust, whatever we want it's going to be termed, but I've described it before, when you set the foundation, or what we term to be the tuapapa, and it's with mana enhancing intent. In other words, where there's respect for one another's cultures, that will vary at times, but for ourselves and other people, the retention of our land is paramount. Utilizing the land we have carefully and wisely, allowing our children and grandchildren to experience the richness of growing up in Otaki, with all of the initiatives, specifically the Māori education initiatives here in Otaki, that have been a 40-year struggle and sometimes here for us here in Otaki, but to say that we're not out of the woods, because there's still a lot more work to do, but where we can create and utilise existing papakainga lands. So we still have a family still live on their traditional papakainga where they have lived, and it's not just Māori people who live on lands where their grandparents or great grandparents, or there'll be fourth, fifth generation Otaki residents living on land that their family have lived on since they arrived in Otaki. The opportunity to, I guess, to offer support through an Otaki, through a community land trust or community housing trust, to those who currently have land but don't necessarily have the means or the understanding of how to go about it. They would welcome any support and opportunity to sit at a table and look at the multiple options that hopefully we can bring to the table to help them realise their dreams of being able to build homes on their what we call whenua tupu. So it's where they've grown up, where their parents have grown up, and where their grandparents have grown up. And probably if I could take a look, just go back to the papakainga development, Sophie, to say that one of the most, I guess, rewarding experiences Ngā Hapu Otaki, and not just Ngā Hapu Otaki, but certainly Te Atiawa and Ngāti Toa Rangatira, but the art collective of the three iwi, the great opportunity we've had sitting with the planning team at Kapiti Coast District Council over the last 18 months, where collectively we were able to make substantial contribution and change to the papakainga plans for Kapiti Coast District Council. And without beating ourselves on the chest, but to say that the plan has deemed to be so well written, where it covers off all the concerns that people have about how to develop their lands, and that when we inherit lands, it's there to be kept, and it's not to be given away or sold or diminished in any way. So working with KCDC and the team, Jason and his team, we've been able to help design a new, a revised plan on papakainga development in Otaki, and what those criteria and requirements are. So much so that other local councils within the Greater Wellington region have asked for a copy of those papakainga development plans and policies. And I think that's a major step forward for any council. And that's why we certainly sing praises of the team. A partnership requires both people to be willing to sit at the table and discuss in depth, but more importantly, to hear one another. And we're comfortable that we've been heard. And the result is a papakainga plan change that we think is going to help generations of our people, and not just those of us who live in Kapiti Coast District Council, but certainly in the wider Greater Wellington Regional Council. I've described it to my family and other family we have up at Rotorua, to say that, other councils could take a leaf out of Kapiti Coast District Council and learn to get to the table with the iwi and be able to design such great policies where it's a win-win for everybody. So, Sophia, I hope that helps our people at Ngāti Haumea.
Yeah, definitely does. Kia ora. Thanks for all of your wisdom and your words. Thank you so much, Denise.
Kia ora, Denise. It's great to hear the fantastic stories coming out of Otaki and the work that you've been doing as Ngā Hapu, but also with Council. It's always great to hear those fantastic stories, really, in terms of that. So thank you for your time this evening and your contribution.
Thank you.
Ka kite. All right, we're on to our last speaker for the evening, which is Kevin. Kia ora, Kevin.
Yeah, I recognise a few faces, but
That's good.
okay. Just for people who don't know me, just a bit of background on myself. I was a member of the Mayoral Task Force on Housing in 2018, which produced I believe, a comprehensive report. I'd have to say that was received with a deafening silence by council for a while. But also, having said that, the last triennium deserve a big tick for what they did about housing. They picked up most of those recommendations we made, and I think they've done some good work and some good progress in if the housing is moved, I'm really talking about in most of this submission about the older person social housing that council owned, the 118 tenancies that are there. Should also say, also part of I'm a past president of Kapiticoast Grey Power, which housing was a big problem. Presently, I'm on the Older People's Council, and I've been involved with council in developing an age-friendly strategy, which I'll talk about later on too, actually. If the housing is to be moved to another entity, I think I would prefer a CCO, actually. I've talked about this at the annual plan, but I have a concern about the consultation documents, and I'll read it out. The quote: a major limitation of a CCO option is that a CCO is unlikely to be able to access central government funding such as income-related rents. Using the word unlikely, I find confusing, quite frankly. It means you're not sure. And you should be sure, yeah. People need to know what the state of play is, really. Would a CCO be, my belief is it was, because a CCO would be a subsidiary of a holding company, so it's 2 steps removed, plus it'd have an independent board. So I think that needs to be cleared up, really, whether it is or not. But having said that, all trusts require a trust deed, which sets out the purpose and the objectives of the trust to ensure it is focused on its intended purposes. Consultation with the community needs to take place on the trust deed, so everybody clearly understands their respective roles. Any memorandum of understanding between council and the trust would need to be updated on an annual basis to make sure that there is a shared understanding of issues and focus areas. Part of the consultation document talks about affordable housing, but it's got no definition of affordable housing, not that I could see. The general definition of affordable housing is that a household would spend 30% of their income on either rent or mortgage repayments. And I'm assuming that's what it means, but I think council needs to be a lot clearer on that issue. There are opportunities and challenges about a trust, I believe, and I'd just like to sort of go through them. The opportunities, it would give the trust the issue to access some central government resources such as income-related rents. And it can provide governance and administration and delivery functions suited to that housing, to that need. It could also be use local experience and interact with the local community. And it can also partnership with other providers, or such as iwi and such. The challenges, I think, are the first challenge is that if a trust makes a decision that people are unhappy with, council would get the blame for it. Yeah, yeah. That's just a fact of life, whether we like that or not. Yeah, and yeah. And if the ratepayers really see that there is a way that the council are responsible for all its decisions, if the trust makes a decision, the community and council disagree. If council disagrees with that decision, there's no way of reversing that decision apart from disbanding the trust. And in order to mitigate this, I would suggest that the council needs to provide a clear trust deed that sets out the responsibilities of each organisation. Any MOU needs to be updated on an annual basis after consultation with the community. The trust also needs to communicate with both council and the community on a regular basis, and that needs to be written in things like trust deed by providing reports, updates, and everything. I'd just like one of the other challenges, and for me, it's a major challenge in this. I am assuming that the council is contributing the housing trust take advantage of income-related rents. You transfer the 118 older persons housing into the trust, and they would get the 100. At present, that older person housing is provided by council for people over 65 with a social need. And for this, I've drawn a distinction between older persons housing and social housing. Social housing, as defined by the government, is housing available to people of all ages with a social need that can be subsidised by the central government with income-related rents. If the older person's houses are transferred to the trust could apply for income-related rents. But they're only provided for social housing of people with all ages. Therefore, when one of those older person's housing in the trust is vacated, it would go to, or could go to, it would go to anybody with a social need, regardless of their age. That, I think, is an issue, because I personally would like to see that they remain as older people's houses. I'm not saying there is a very strong need for social housing in Kapiti, very strong need, but it shouldn't be done at the expense of the older people's housing. I'm not too sure if there's a way around this issue, actually, in there. I made this submission to council. I brought this issue up to council the last long-term plan. Was it the long-term or the annual? I can't remember which one, actually. But anyway, when they were advocating and discussing a holding company, and I made the council said that they would investigate the issue and get back to me, but nobody else. So it's still a black hole as far as I'm concerned. I think, though, that prior to I think there may be a couple of ways, and to be honest, I'm not too sure if they would really work. The council could make a stipulation in the trust deed that the present older person's housing will remain strictly for older people. The housing could still be subsidised by council, but I doubt if actually council wants to do that, quite frankly. That's one of the reasons for looking at the income-related. Right? But whatever the reason, prior to establishing a trust, council needs to investigate if there's a way around this. And I think the public, the community needs to know what's going to happen to those housing. And needs to be upfront and clear. If they're going to be all social housing, then do that. say that very clearly to people. But my experience in both Grey Power, the older persons, has taught me that Kapiti residents value the older person's housing. They really think it's a valued thing. And if you're upfront and honest about that, you will get some feedback on the issue. I think that's what I'm really looking for on this. The question, when I was on the Housing Task Force, we looked at a number of places, and I think there's a question about when you establish a trust, do you transfer and give land housing to the trust, or do you lease it to the trust? The model we looked at was Christchurch at that stage, and they wanted to retain ownership of the land and assets, and they leased that to the trust, and that seemed to work very well in there. Just on age-friendly, that's do people understand the age-friendly strategy? I understand it will be coming in front of council shortly. I think it was supposed to be next week, but I know it's been delayed for a while. I've been working on that for quite a while now with other people, and council staff, I have to say, have done a really good job on that end. But I think that housing is a big part of the age-friendly strategy. The trust deed or the MOU needs to make reference to age-friendly strategies when housing in there. There is about, last figures I saw, about 30% of Kapiti residents were over the age of 65. And, so there's a high proportion of the. I would also encourage people to, when looking at the trust deed, writing it, to have a look at the World Health Organization site on age friendly, although to be honest, you'll get drowned in information on that one. But the Office of the Seniors have actually got some good stuff too. And they are developing a housing strategy, if you like, around about age-friendly issues there. So I'd encourage council to look at those issues too. That's it. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kevin. How are we going? Lights on. You beat him. Well done. Councillor Warwick has a question for you.
I'm just wondering what you think of. I agree keeping older persons housing to older persons, but there is a couple of developments in Otaki where the land is not really used efficiently, and if it was put into some kind of trust and redeveloped to accommodate more people, how did your task force, did they investigate that?
I don't think we did actually. Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, but I don't expect older persons' houses to be until they fall down type. I am expecting them to be redeveloped and but there needs to be a place for them. I believe quite strongly.
It's just that some of there's one specifically I'm thinking of. There's only a few houses and a lot of land around them, which is maintenance, and the buildings are quite old. So.
Yeah.
But keeping it older persons only would be.
Yeah, I mean, but my personal view is that housing development needs to be multi-generational. Shouldn't be just sort of older people here and younger people here, but there needs to be some designation for older people housing in any developments, if you like.
Housing is, you don't want it to be kept just for older people.
If there's a replacement, yes, but yeah, I would prefer it to be kept for older people. But if, as time goes by, You're always redeveloping things, yeah. So, but there always needs to be provision for older people's housing.
So it's probably important to note for you, Kevin, that we do have a separate process going for older persons housing.
I didn't know that.
Is separate to the Community Land Trust conversation. So you'll have an opportunity to speak into the older housing portfolio and what happens with that and that other bit of work that will go on.
Oh, thank you for that. I didn't realise that.
Okay. And the other thing, just for reassurance, this probably goes a bit to Paul and his comment earlier about the maintenance that goes on often with council properties. I know there's a comprehensive maintenance program that's going on all of our older persons housing right now. Significant investment to get it all up to what is legislatively required as good landlords. So so that is happening. I'll pass over to Councillor Halliday.
Stole my thunder.
Oh, did I? Oh, yay!
Did not speak about it.
But look, just for
I think it's the first time ever, isn't it?
Just want to make, it was a question to officers just around the older person's housing. As far as I'm aware, that is ring-fenced and not really being included as part of the conversation around the CLD. Would that be is that correct? Yeah. So.
Yeah, so that was out of scope for this particular piece of work, acknowledging that as part of the housing strategy that a review to the existing council older person housing land would be undertaken, and there'll be separate stakeholder engagement and full consultation process as part of that.
Well, could I just make a comment on that? Because when I read the documents, the consultation documents, I just assumed that older persons, that's why I'm making the submission, older persons are going to be in there. I think then that needs to be clear in any further newsletters and stuff that needs to go out, actually.
I can say thank you. We'll take that on into account and look forward to talking to you more about next steps with older people housing.
Thank you.
And I also just wanted to thank you, Trevor, for
Kevin.
My
Kevin,
apologies.
you're confused with my...
hard. My apologies.
Yeah.
But it just so happens that the All Housing Task Force report, I'm actually in the process of circulating it to our housing committee at the moment, because as a starting document with regards to bringing them up to speed with regards to conversations. So just wanted to assure you that I am and intend to make use of that. I think it's an excellent document.
Thank you.
But do also appreciate that it was sitting on a shelf for a little bit too long. So I was quite happy that within the last training we could start some movement in that space.
Thank you, Ryan.
Kevin, thanks for that. And as Councillor Halliday said, our housing task force is moving along. Hey, look, with regard to that question about land ownership, I think the best model I sort of have seen is the trust, whether it's a partnership with the council, owns the land. An individual comes along and buys the house, but doesn't buy the land, has a licence to occupy. When he comes to sell, he can't just flog it off at a great big profit and then walk off. He's got to sell it back to the trust, okay? And they administer it, take 10% off or something, and then sell it off to the next person. So it's all under control with the trust.
Wow.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you, Kevin. Appreciate your submission and your contribution tonight as well. And to all of our other public speakers and those online, thank you for being here. We've got a couple of next steps slides just to talk through. Do you want to do those, Laura? Just to make it clear what the next steps are in this process, so everyone's aware of that.
We'll just get them brought up on screen. So the next steps are we have a report to Council on the agenda currently for the 27th of April to progress this forward, and a summary of the consultation responses and also this evening's feedback will be included in that report. And as requested in our session with elected members in February, there'll be things such as draft trust deed, a step-by-step process on how that may work, and also a draft relationship framework agreement, or sometimes referred to as the MOU, between a trust and council, and how that can look will be as part of that report. But if there is any other questions or concerns regarding the next steps, happy to answer those this evening. Otherwise, we'll see you on the 27th.
Fantastic. And some of our submitters tonight will be very happy to hear about those details coming up with the draft trust deed and the MOU. And I will expect to have maybe some public speakers on that morning of the 27th to talk to that after having seen those documents and like to provide us with some input and some thoughts around that. You'll be welcome to do that. All right. Otherwise, I think, are there any questions? Oh, Martin.
Thank you.
I'm pretty sure I blocked your one. No, that was too slow. Dang.
A question I had actually, 279 I think it was, submissions come through. Is it possible to, if the information's ready, or even if it can come through in perhaps two parts, but if there's any chance of getting, there'll be a review of the submissions, which will come back, that'll be quite a substantial document I'm picking. If that could be made available to us sooner rather than later, would be much appreciated, just to give us a bit more time to get through it. Would be great. I appreciate that there'll be time constraints, but maybe if that information might be sitting there earlier than the report's done, that could maybe be released a little bit earlier, would be appreciated.
Yeah, we can absolutely do that.
There is a document on LG Hub which summarises as an overview of the consultation. Is that the one you're meaning, or you?
I have to through that. I'm assuming it's that final document, or if it was just what I wasn't too sure whether it was or not.
Yeah, so that was, I guess, a summary of the questions that were asked during the consultation process, but the intention is to provide a full breakdown of the survey responses. Some people have indicated that they don't want their names to be shared in that forum, so we just need to go through that process of redacting that personal information, and then we can make that available.
Lovely, appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Fantastic.
And actually, you make a very valid point, Lawrence. Maybe not everyone's aware that the information is on the website. Maybe if a link to that could be circulated as a reminder to people, would be much appreciated.
Oh, the Mayor is online, so I'll... Kia ora, Janet.
Kia ora. I just thought I'd pop on and say I'm still here, and it's been a really great session tonight. Thanks for chairing, Lawrence, and thanks, councillors, for some really good questions, and to all the submitters and staff. And we'll see you next week.
Fantastic. Thank you, Janet. Have a great cold time.
Thanks, Lawrence.
All right. Kia ora, everyone. Thank you so much for your time. We're done. We'll call that closed. Thank you, everyone that has attended from the public. Donna, thank you. I hope you've got enough notes there. Fantastic.